Hi, this is Peter Teuscher, and I'm here with Tobi Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we pick a topic and see where the discussion takes us. We usually cover topics around personal development, organizational change, culture, and a little bit of philosophy. So hope you enjoy our conversation. It's pretty early for us this time. Tobi's been very generous with his time and joined us on his vacation. So how you doing in your vacation home, Tobi?
I'm feeling more and more relaxed, that's for sure. It takes a while to get into that vacation mode and to really relax. But now I've been here 2 or 3 days, and it's starting to settle in. So it's nice. I'm in
Nice.
a beautiful island in Sweden called Gotland, which is it's a good kind of summer, very sunny kind of place. So it's all good.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's jump right into it. What topic have you got for us this time?
Yeah, so I thought we haven't talked about one of my favorite topics, and actually kind of the topic that got me into this business in the first one, which is around team development. So when I started in this business as a facilitator, for like 17 years ago or something like that. I got into we call it the team buildings, and I was in China at the time, so we were organizing events, hiking up the Great Wall. We had a great facility up there where we did lots of different kind of team building activities, which was great. But then after a while, sort of developing in the area. It became much more of strategical team development rather than having fun team building activities, So I thought we could talk about, what is team development, what does a team need, what does a high performing team look like, these kind of topics, and see where it takes us.
Sounds good. I think for our listeners, maybe for those of you who are more interested in your own personal development, I want to point out that, in some way or form, we are all part of teams, right? So whether it's your family unit, whether it's, your circle of friends, or whether it's a workplace type of situation. So I think everyone is interdependent and interacting with people. And so I think the skills you learn in terms of team development are also skills that you can learn on an individual level. So I just wanted to throw that in there. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. I didn't think about that. But if we're looking at one of these reports, sometimes I look at reports of what the future workplace looked like and what kind of skills we need. And one of these reports that I was looking at, I think it was an IBM report, they were really, really emphasizing this part of the ability to cooperate with others. And very quickly kind of create these bonds and bonds of trust to be able to cooperate in a virtual setting with people all over the world on projects. So I think that's absolutely crucial to have that ability to understand what is it that creates a beneficial and effective working relationship. What does it take to do that? And realizing your own role in that sense. So what can you do to support and create these kind of relationships?
I forgot to mention that we have a special guest today.
Oh, is that what I was hearing something in the
This is Shiva.
background?
She's my little foster dog, and she's making a little bit of noise in the background, and she was just clambering around my legs. Sorry, I didn't want to distract from your topic, but I think. Sorry, I got distracted by the dog scratching at my
Yeah,
leg.
fine. No, no, we started off with the individual
Yeah.
aspect of teams, and your own professional ability to create relationships and to work with others, cooperate with others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things that I find super important in the team. It's for one, the ability to cooperate, and for two, the ability to communicate well. So, people who are really successful in life are good communicators. So I think the part of developing a cohesive team is also that. And I guess the model that I most often refer to when I'm working with groups in terms of team development is the Tuckman model, which you know very well. And I think it's important for people to understand those kind of, well, it started with 4 phases of team development, and then they added the 5th one later. But I mean, this is a model I think that's been around for 40, 50 years. I think it came around in the 70s.
At least I think it's from the 60s actually. So it's
yeah. So I think understanding where you're at in terms of the team development. Are you a new team? Have you been together for a long time? Are you in transition? I think those are all really important things to consider what stage you're at. So there's a group dynamic and there's an individual dynamic. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, certainly. There's there's the saying there's no I in team, but of course there is.
Well,
Yeah, I think to go back to some of these fundamental models, we can see some of the most famous and most referred to models of group development. We can see some very clear patterns of what is needed and what is needed in different stages of teams. If we're referring to the Tuckman model, forming, storming, norming, performing, or something that I've worked a lot with recently is called the Integrated Model of Team Development, which is by Susan Whelan. And there's a lot of similarities with the Tuckman model, but you can clearly see how a team in the beginning is very dependent on the leader and very reliant on the leader to give direction and purpose, etc. While in the other stage, it's much more about your individual space and finding your individual space, and that can create conflicts and various aspects of ineffective behaviors before you're finding this commonality of how do you work together, and eventually then in the final end there's if you refer to Tuckman, it would be performing, but a stage of productivity and agility and flexibility, a really good task focus. It can be a lot of conflicts, but they're not so much about the people. It's more about how we're doing things and what we should be doing, the priorities, etc. And for me, it's really interesting to see the leadership aspect of this. In the beginning of this cycle, if we want to call it that, there's a really heavy reliance on the leader to see what does the leader bring to the table, how much do we trust this leader, how much direction does he or she give us, what atmosphere is created. But then if you're looking at a very high performing team, the leader aspect isn't, well, the leader aspect is important, but the leadership role is much more autonomous. It's much more flexible. Anybody can take leadership, and for the original kind of assigned leader, maybe it's an opportunity for this person to focus more on creating resources and strategical work, and so it's very different kind of aspects that you have to work with. So if you're looking just from a leadership perspective, I think that's really interesting to have an awareness of, where are we in the team and how can I support the team to be as effective as possible of where we are right now.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about leadership. The first thing that I was going to ask you was, well, how does that apply to agile organizations where there's less of a hierarchy? And I think you nailed it right there. I think leaders in the group will naturally evolve and emerge. And I think I saw this. I mean, my first sort of inadvertent attempts at team development was when I was a basketball coach. I think, I got into it I got into it wanting to teach kids and wanting to try and be a good role model and really have that experience. And I didn't know anything about team development. And so it was a really good learning process for me to see how these dynamics evolve and how to bring a cohesive team together, because you don't become successful or a winning team unless you find that the team pulls together. People, natural leaders will automatically emerge. So as a coach, in a game, you're on the sideline. You need someone who can have that leadership function on the court, but also in practices you can't be everywhere all the time, and so you need people, allies, sort of ambassadors for what you're trying to people who get what you're trying to say, or who are evolved in on a skill level beyond maybe the rest of the team, and so I think recognizing the people that have those skills and qualities really, and empowering them, really helps to solidify the team dynamic. So I don't know what your experience is in that.
Yeah. No, no, I was just thinking when you were mentioning that, as you say, I mean, basically all of us are or have been or will be part of some team in some aspect at some point, right? I mean, it's kind of an essential, even if it's either in your professional life or if as a sports team or whatever. But then, yeah, what is it that makes a team successful? And then first of all, to have an awareness of, because I think most of us have been thrown into teams before we had any idea about team dynamics and these kind of theories, but still we can be very successful. But what is it that makes the success? And I think very often it's something that you're faced with, a challenge that you have to overcome together, and then that really pulls you together, and you have to find ways to get together and reach this objective, this common objective, which is very essential to have a feeling for as a team.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at our evolutionary origins, we've been successful as a species because of our ability to cooperate, and so I think we have this innate desire to help each other and to want to cooperate with each other. You can talk all about game theory all you want, where people are have selfish motives, but I think for the most part people are very eager to find ways to have harmony, to find ways to cooperate with each other and have a successful outcome. I think people are far more engaged, and I think there's an even more gratifying feeling of accomplishment when you've done something as a team, whereas just individual accomplishments. At least that's been my personal experience, but it's also been what I've observed. People really get a high from we came together as a team and we accomplished something together, and sharing that whole sense of sharing in your sense of accomplishment. You can. I think that's. I'm very comfortable being alone, and I've done a lot of really interesting things. But at the end of the day, it's really, I think it's really great to be able to share that with someone, and
Yeah.
those successes. And obviously, social media, Facebook and so on, they thrive on that need to want to share our experiences with other people. So I think that all plays into the things that drive us in a team dynamic is. I think that we definitely enjoy coming together as a group, and accomplishing things and moving things forward, rather than only just our own individual successes and accomplishments. Those matter too, but what I've observed and what I've experienced, I find that the group experience is even more rewarding.
Yeah, I yeah, I think I totally agree, actually. I mean, as you say, both of us work very much on an individual basis. Of course, we work a lot in project teams and stuff, but that fulfilling kind of, successful feeling of success when you can share a success with someone else that you've been working with very hard with, it's a fantastic feeling. So yeah. That is something that's really rewarding, and that's fun with teams. And also, I mean, in if we're talking about our own situation, some things that I can feel very frustrating is when you're working alone and you run into a problem, or you need to solve something, you don't have anybody to talk to, and not in your close environment. Of course, I mean, I could call you up or other colleagues that I work with, but it's not really, just leaning over to another desk or grabbing that coffee and, going to the coffee machine and talking about a problem that you might have encountered or that somebody knows anything about. That's something that I miss sometimes. I have to admit that's one of the downsides of being a consultant working by myself.
I think that's something that people are going to experience as we, well, through the COVID period, having worked a lot of home office. A lot of people working home office, and now people who are thinking, well, I think I could do this long term. I think for someone like myself who has worked alone home office for a long time now, even when I was still working in the corporate world, I always tended to work remotely and manage teams remotely,
Mm,
which is, I think, an interesting topic we can maybe cover today. But
mhm,
because that becomes, it's not like you often don't just call someone up just to have a chat, and sometimes that's where some of the best conversations happen, right? Where there's not a set of agenda. You just kind of need to get something off your chest, and then all of a sudden it becomes this brainstorming session and so on.
mhm.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think this it becomes more difficult the more isolated we become. So I can totally relate, and that's
Mm.
why I find I really enjoy when obviously you and I, we both give workshops on our own. Not all companies are willing to hire a team of facilitators to put on a
Mm.
workshop. So, I like when we work together in China, or the other teams I've worked with when we travel to the U.S. or within Germany. I found the collaboration super rewarding, and
Yeah,
there is that sense of security and support
yeah.
that you have, which I really enjoy.
Mm. And learning as well. I mean, because you always learn so much from working with other people, just seeing different aspects and different styles and etc. And that's, I mean, if we bring in another aspect of team development that is super important and also very sort of hot on the topic list is the sense of diversity and inclusion. To It's really important in a team to have a diverse sort of skill set, but also maybe if we're talking about cognitive diversity, to have different ways of thinking about the stuff, different habits about dealing with problems, etc. It's really, I mean, first of all, it's very beneficial for the output of the team to be able to get different perspectives, different aspects of things. But it's also really interesting, right? If you have both the time and the patience of digging into that, that's interesting. Why would Peter think about it from that perspective? I wonder what kind of experience he has had to see it from that perspective. So I've never thought in that way, and being able to build an atmosphere of inclusion in a team or in the whole organization, of course, but using inclusion as an aspect of utilizing diversity as a creative and solution focused kind of approach for problem solving, for creativity, for predictions, etc. So this, because when we talk about effective teams, if I go back to a little bit more theory, I mean, some of the parts that are really basic is, first of all, to have a common goal that everybody aspires to, a mutual common goal, and to have mutual accountability, of course, for a sense of mutual accountability, and interdependent roles. So we're doing things, we have our roles in the team, we know what we should do, but we are also interdependent, so there's a sense of trust among us, and that we have diverse skills. That's also one of these aspects that are really important, that we're good at different things. So not everybody can be the accountant. If we have a team of 10 accountants that are supposed to do different things, that's going to be a problem. But if we have different kind of a big palette of skills, that's really, really important. So, and then to be able to tap into that resource in an effective way, that takes a lot of, it can lead to a lot of conflict, of course. It needs a lot of trust. It needs a lot of understanding of what we're here to do and how we should do it. But when you can take advantage of that richness in the diversity, then it becomes a real beneficial force for the team.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that myself, having worked with and worked within international teams where you have people with all kinds of cultural backgrounds and different perspectives. And in the corporate world, you'll work with people in finance who may be not as extroverted, and not stereotyping, because I've met very extroverted finance people as well. But obviously, different roles require different kind of skill sets, and those skill sets tend to be tied to certain personality types. But I think the one thing I wanted to touch on, because I find this, especially in North America, is there's, especially the last couple of years, there's been this real focus on diversity and inclusion, focuses very heavily on things like race and gender, and naturally, when you have diversity in that area, you will also have a diversity of ideas. But I think the emphasis needs to be on the diversity of ideas, because just because you have a certain quota of people of various ethnicities and genders doesn't necessarily guarantee they can all still have a conservative or very liberal mindset, and then you're not bringing a ton to the table. I think what's really important is, and I've worked with the CEO who said, I don't want to have a company full of people that think exactly like me, because it'll be just so one-sided. And I think that's the important thing, to recognize and respect that there are that people can make contributions who have a variety of backgrounds, a variety of mindsets, and different ways of seeing the world, because that's when you're going to really get good at solving problems. That's when you're going to come up with new and different and interesting ideas. And if you have people, regardless of their cultural background, who all kind of come to the table with the same kind of mindset, then you're, or at least perspective, whether it's conservative or liberal, or whether it's too specialized in one area, you're just not going to have a diversity of ideas in order to solve the challenges of the modern day workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think exactly. I mean, diversity and inclusion, it becomes a real, yeah, kind of game changer if you utilize it in the right way. But I really do agree with that. And I have one client that has a very ambitious and good goal in that sense about diversity. But when they're looking at it from the gender perspective, so they have a very clear goal of what that should look like. And I think we can all applaud that, and it's good. However, you can question the motivation for it, because personally speaking, I'm guessing that the reason for choosing that aspect is only because it's easy to measure. Right? It's very obvious if we have, whatever percentage of female workers in the workforce, or whatever. And this is good, but however, I think you're right there, that if we focus more on the cognitive aspect of diversity, it's so much more. And if we're just focusing on one thing, maybe that's a good starting point, actually. So that's good, but it's so much more, and there's more other aspects of diversity that we also need to take into consideration. And especially if we're thinking about the team aspect and of the team dynamics, what it doesn't, we cannot only be looking at a gender aspect of diversity. It's important, but it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think the measurement piece is an important one that you point out. And I've got mixed feelings about the various personality type models because, the whether it's Myers-Briggs or, you've got colors or the disc model. I
Mm,
find one that the one, and it's one of the ones that's been around the longest, I think, is the Berkman model.
mm,
And I think that I find really helpful, because it looks at, even the individual from different perspectives. It looks at your usual behaviors, what your needs are, and what your stress behaviors are, and then when you can, as an organization, um, if you can get people to do that kind of assessment, then you can make sure that you don't just have the people who, like in the Berkman model, you've got the doers and the people who are, more analytical,
mm.
people who are more communicative, and geez, I'm drawing a blank on the fourth one now, but it and that really helps you recognize the personality type, irregardless of those other factors. And I agree with you. I think there are industries where it's been a boys club for far too long, and certainly depending on the country that you're in, it's just so homogenous, in terms of the type of people that they hire. But so I think that is very important, and you'll naturally, when you hire a diversity of people, you'll naturally get different viewpoints. But I think when you use a tool that can recognize different skill sets and different ways of thinking about problems, the Berkman model, I think, is a really good one, because you
Mm.
can't just have, if you've only got a room full of visionaries, then where are the people who are going to be analytical and going, well, thinking a little bit more, in terms of what the risk benefit
Yeah.
analysis and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I also have my a lot of doubts about all these kind of assessments, and I think we touched upon that a little bit before. I mean, I used the MBTI and DISC a lot. I ran into Bellman's, what are called Bellman's role assessments or whatever it's called. Um, but I have to admit, I mean, before I knew anything about DISC or MBTI or anything like that, when I was, working in a team, and we had someone coming in and talking about, I think we did DISC. I found it really beneficial to create a sense of empathy of how other are behaving, and that might be their preference of behaving in a certain way. And I think it can really, I mean, that discussion, that to have that kind of discussion in a team can be really helpful to create a sense of understanding and trust and empathy that I mean, I understand why this person is doing like that. I understand that the intention is not to be evil, whatever. But that we all have different ways of doing stuff, and maybe, I mean, I was a lot younger at that time, so maybe that's also one aspect of it. If you're more junior in your role or in your experience, it can be a great eye opener to understand that people think and work in different ways.
Yeah.
But to having that kind of discussion about how we're doing things, why are we doing ways in a certain way? Because in teams, very often we focus so much on the what are we supposed to do, um, but not on how we're the softer parts of the how we're working together, how are we making decisions, how are we conducting meetings, these kind of parts. And to open up space for these kind of discussions, I think it's really it's very interesting, but it's also very helpful to understand then, okay, so we can be more effective about the what, and to create a clear understanding of what the common goal is.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the importance of the role of leadership, I think that's one area where that it really applies as well, because when you recognize the different strengths and of your team and the different kind of communication styles, because I think that's what the DISC model is really good for, is recognizing, what's the best way to communicate with different individuals. That's a good aspect of it. And so when you're trying to when you have a meeting or whatever, and you recognize the people that are always coming up with the ideas, they may be they may be the more extroverted of the group, and it may be that the more introverted people have lots of really great ideas, but they're just not willing to come forth with them, right? Or make themselves feel vulnerable by putting ideas out there. And so I think communication is a key, and I think I think I've even touched on Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions before, but I think in team development, having that foundation of trust is absolutely the first step. And people often think, well, sure, I trust my colleagues, or I trust that people will get their job done. And that's obviously not the kind of trust we're talking about. It's the kind of trust to go, hey, listen, I don't really understand this, or I think I made a mistake here, or that willingness to just raise your hand and say I don't know, or I'm confused, or that kind of thing. That level of vulnerability that's essential for you to be able to expose your weaknesses, or be willing to share your ideas, even if they may face criticism. And as you know, Lencioni talks about how if you don't have that trust, then it leads to a lack of conflict and no commitment and no accountability, and then at the end of the day, an attention to results. So I think trust for me, in terms of team development, finding ways for people to trust each other in a way that they can really be authentic. We talked about authenticity in a previous podcast. And then you naturally have people who respect each other more, because you just you don't just have these preconceived ideas about people, because people are more open and exposing themselves more.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that's one of the things that are really good if we're talking about team buildings, or team dynamic, team development workshops, I'd like to call it, is when you take that aspect of investing your time to create these relationships and creating these trust, because that doesn't just happen over day. In my experience too, for instance, in one program that we're doing, we're taking a lot of time to invest in this. We do this really personal kind of self-introductions, when you talk about on a quite deep level and open up and talk about yourself. The amount of trust that activity can create is just it's amazing, I reckon. And if you're running into a meeting room or running into the office and just focusing on the task all the time, you don't have time to do that, and you overlook that. I mean, it's not intuitive to open up in that sense. So I think it's really beneficial to do these kind of team development activities when you address authenticity, as you're talking about. You address trust, the part of the part about the interpersonal relationships that are important in a team. And some people may think that it's not important, but if you look at effectiveness of a team, most people would probably agree that it actually is really important. And you see the difference, and you can both see and feel the difference when you've done that. It's very it's a sense, it's a feeling of I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, it's a really good feeling.
Yeah, and it's it's obviously it's different amongst. I think if you have a group of salespeople, and I've done sales training in the past as well, or if you have a group full of engineers, or maybe a group full of accountants, and again, not trying to stereotype, because they're even within those kind of professions, there are obviously lots of different personality types. But you find the people who work in more analytical, very maybe a group of scientists, or that are very much focused on facts and tasks and very regimented in their thinking in some ways. Trying to get people out of that comfort zone, out of that, in order to, learn to have some of their more their soft skills engaged than they normally would in their day-to-day workplace. I think that's important. And I think the other place that it's sometimes challenging is people at very top levels of business can sometimes, people who are very successful, there's an element of ego that comes in there, and certainly nobody wants to. I've seen this in sport too. Nobody wants to show their weakness, right?
Yeah.
And so if people aren't comfortable enough to expose themselves in that way, and certainly you see it in boardrooms, or you see it in highly competitive environments where you never let them see you sweat, sort of kind of thing, and that's counterproductive, right?
Yeah, yeah, that becomes. I've never really worked on a board level, but I mean that would be super interesting to see. What aspects of team development comes into play there? Because I mean, I would have my 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 thoughts about what it might look like, but it might not be true. But if you're thinking about a bunch of people that are extremely experienced in the business world, they know exactly what they're doing in that sense. But then, yeah, you have to prove yourself worthy of that place. And how does team development come into place? That would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, and that makes a huge difference in organizational culture, because I mean I've worked with and I've worked for people at the CEO level or at board level, and I've worked for a CEO that just created such a toxic environment, and ended up having basically a bunch of yes men in the room, and you could never really talk about the people who were afraid to table the real issues. I mean, there were conversations going in the background, and yet nothing was discussed productively because it was a dictatorship, and so there was no diversity of ideas at all. And then I've also on a coaching level worked with people where you're trying to implement cultural change, and culture is a super important piece of the whole team development aspect, and you'll have people at the upper level of management who are really buying in and really want to see the changes that are necessary, but then you've got people at like a board level who are like, yeah, that's fine for everybody else, but we're doing our own thing, and even to the point where I worked with one organization where you'll have everybody really buying in, and then you'll have the the CEO or the COO or somebody. No, well, I'm going to get my own coach, and we're going to do our own thing, and you just see that they're not living the principles, and they want to be the exception, and especially when you're trying to develop strong team culture. That leadership has to come from the very top of organizations if you want it to be a lasting change in the culture of your organization and the way you develop as a greater team, and also within your individual teams throughout the organization.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, yeah, okay. I mentioned that I haven't worked on a board level, but I've worked with a lot of executive teams and doing these kind of things, and it's the same thing as doing it as with any other team, I reckon. Of course, there's a lot more experience, so you might get different kind of challenges and questions, but essentially it's the same thing for any team, right? So, but yeah, it has to come from the top. I mean, if it's done half-doubtly and you're not actually believing in what you're doing, there's no point, and it becomes quite obvious very quickly if you're into it or not.
Yeah, and I've found in my own leadership roles, I've especially if you have younger and experienced people in your team, really having to encourage them to challenge you, encourage them to look, tell me that you think I'm wrong, right? And I think for some people who maybe have had different bosses or different leaders that they reported to. Sometimes you've got to open that door for them, because until you have that two-way communication and that them trusting enough that they can voice their opinion or their disagreement, I think it'll be, you can do all, you can have all the right intentions as a leader to try and develop a really strong team. But if you're not recognizing that there are people in your team that don't feel comfortable, haven't quite developed that level of trust, then I think you're not going to get the team dynamic that you're after.
Yeah. Didn't we talk about the importance of challenge last time?
Yep.
And it comes right into play there as well. Do you allow challenge in your team environment to create that sense of dissent, I guess, to allow for different voices and perspectives and etc.
That can be very challenging as a leader. It's at times a lot easier just to be a dictator, but it doesn't get you the best results. I can guarantee it.
Yeah. But so what about I was just thinking also that we can talk about team building activities and quite productive kind of team development initiative. In your experience, what are some good activities or initiatives or whatever you want to call it, projects maybe to develop more effective teams?
It depends on, there's no one size fits all. I think it really depends very much on, going back to the Tuckman Model, what stage of development they are at, and what the challenges are. So, if it's trust, that's a fundamental pillar. If it's people who've been together as a team for a long time and are very much in their comfort zone, but the culture's not right, it's not productive, and you've got people with the thinking that this is the way we've always done things, right? And so I think it really depends on the challenges that the organization faces, whether it's a period of transition or whether it's a startup or maybe there's not a clear culture already developed. So I think it can be very, very different. But I think one key thing, if you're looking at an activity, what's really important, because people will have these workshops in one of their offices, right? And I think it's really important, if you want to get people out of that work mindset, is you've got to remove them from that work environment to expose them to new experiences and to let them show a different side of themselves. So I think the first step is take them out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, I guess so. And that's interesting how you can actually do that remotely now, even though people are sitting in their homes. But just bringing in a completely different activity or aspect of things, they have to use a different mindset of thinking or to be challenged in some way. I mean, I stated that question maybe to give some time for myself to think about it as well. But because
I think relating to that, just to give you a little more time,
sure.
I think the more than the individuals in the team, they're under. When you look at the different dynamics, so you have the typical workplace hierarchies, right? You have whatever level of management the leader of a team is at, but there's a lot of pressure on them to play a certain role, to give good lead, and some of that is self-imposed pressure, some of that is from above, and so when you're looking at team development and taking people out of their comfort zones, I think it's great if you can, especially the leader of any group, to take them out of that sort of typical role as a leader, allow them to relax a little bit, and allow the team to see them from a different aspect and a different dynamic, right? Not in a sense that they're going to lose respect for that person, but to see the human side, right? Depending on the industry, because sometimes leaders or bosses need to Yeah, they need to be or they play the role of the disciplinarian, or they're really hard nosed and just down to the facts, and there's less of that sort of human side that if you saw them interacting with their family or their kids or whatever, you'd realize there's a whole different side of them. And so I think when you're going to do any kind of team development, it's not only getting the people out of the environment they work, but getting them out of the roles that they are typically in, especially
Yeah.
the leaders of any group.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I always encourage the leaders to be a participant in any kind of workshop or what activity like this, and to be able to be flexible with the hats that this person is wearing. I mean, sometimes you have to have the leader kind of hat on, and sometimes you can just be a participant as anybody else, and that's you can reveal sides of yourself that people don't usually see. Um, but yeah, I was thinking about that part of there's really no size fits all, and if I know that a lot of or some there's always some participants that, that we've done team development before, we know what it's about, and you always have these kind of challenges as well. But to create an atmosphere where it's not about an activity, it's really about a development initiative, and it can be, you can do it as a meeting, it can be a workshop, but it's not, going out cooking together or going out, uh, yeah, I don't know, playing a football game. It's really, for me, the fundamental part is really to create a clear understanding of the strategic priorities of the team. So what is it that we need to focus on? And if it's, maybe it's three things that we need to focus on as a team to work on, to be clear about and to be more effective in terms of being able to reach our objective or a common goal. So it's really about aligning and streamlining and understanding about what is the goal, and then what do we need to work on to be able to get there faster or in a more effective way. And that can always be different parts, right? So it's really important to understand where the team is coming from, what's happening in the team. And I think it's really beneficial to do some kind of interviews with stakeholders of the team first, ask what's going on, how you experience things. So you get an understanding of what's happening first, but then also to have some kind of discussion or activity to find out what are the priorities right now. And that can be done. I mean, I've worked with an activity based on the balanced scorecard. So if maybe it's financial aspects or process aspects or personnel aspects or whatever. But then finding an activity or finding a priority of this is what we need to work on, and then finding initiatives. Okay, so what do we need to do as a team to be able to overcome this in a better way? Then it becomes actually quite strategical. And sometimes these strategical parts can also be soft parts. Yeah, we need to create. I mean, you talked about trust or interpersonal relations. We need to create. You know, a better sense of us, or I mean, what you're talking about before in terms of your project that you're into. So what are we here to do? What does us look like? And that can be a really important part of a team development that you don't naturally discuss in a working setting, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was actually what I was going to segue into. I think whether it's been sports teams that I've coached, or business teams, or even it's a lot easier to recognize in a group of friends often, but this sense of identity, right? I think a sense of identity is when people have a common sense of identity, or the team has a sense of identity. I think that brings people together and allows people to perform at a high level. And there's all kinds of aspects to that. But I think the other thing that you mentioned there, because I know you've talked to me about processes that you use So I think defining roles is one as well, and I think that's an important one to point out, that if people are more engaged when they have clearly defined roles, right? So I know I just talked about getting people out of their roles, and but that's why it really is so dependent on what stage the team is at, what challenges you're facing in terms of what kind of development work that you want to do. But especially in relatively new teams and startups and that sort of thing, I think it's really important that that people's roles are very clearly defined. Especially in smaller organizations and startups, you'll find people wearing a number of hats and trying to do a whole bunch of things, and then conflicts arise because there's overlap and people are working inefficiently or ineffectively, and so I think depending if that's the stage you're at, then I think defining the roles is super important, and that's one component of creating this, or it can contribute to finding this group identity. So I think it's, again, what I think at the very beginning I talked about how I mentioned how I think it's an individual dynamic and the group dynamic, and I think defining the roles is that very individual piece, and what do I contribute, and when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, what do I bring? Is it okay for me to be different and have a different kind of opinion than everyone else? And then we get into that whole area of trust, right? So you can see systemically now there's a whole lot of components that contribute to what makes an effective and a good team. So yeah, a lot of angles to come at it from, and a lot of things to consider. But I think recognizing the stage of development that your team is at is really important. So yeah, identity. Going back to your original point, identity is huge. It's a really important thing, and I think we talked in our very first podcast about purpose, and which you reminded me of when we were talking offline, because I think that sense of purpose does help people gain a sense of identity, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, comes back to that common goal. What are we here to do? And just having a clarity of that talks a lot about the purpose. What are we here to do? What's our mission? What are we here to solve? And then how do we do it? And then what's our long-term goals, etc. So having a clarity around that is super. And I think very often along the way you forget. Because you get into your day-to-day work, and if you've been working with something on a long time, you take certain things for granted. But if you're not reminded of what we are here to do, and how we're getting there in an effective way, you can lose track of that very easily. To get reminded into getting back to that original idea of what is the common purpose, and what is that we're here to do. And very often I find, if you ask, if you have a team of 10 people, say, and you ask them individually, what's the objective of this team, what is your goal, you might very well get 10 very different answers. Say from my perspective, it's this, and so to have the commonality of what it is, that I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think if people go back to a time when they came together as a group, whether people will do adventure travel, and they'll and there will be the group that they join, whether it's a trek or climbing a mountain or whatever, that you'll get this whole people having their individual challenges but coming together as a group, or you'll have a neighborhood that faces a challenge and they come together and they overcome it together. And I think if you can think of a time in your life where you really came together with people and you solved a problem, essentially that's constantly what we're trying to do in the workplace. And so if you can think about the dynamics of what was it that made me feel so good about that accomplishment, or what was it that brought us together, and a common a challenge that we're all trying to overcome, and respect for each other, and being open to different people's viewpoints on how to get it solved, but also someone in the group taking a kind of a leadership role. I think you'll find all of those things, whether it's in personal life or in business, you'll find that's a very common theme. Like, what is it that created this environment of accomplishment and togetherness? And it'll always be those common factors of, did a leader emerge? Was there good communication? Did we have a common purpose? Did a sense of identity grow within the group? Those are all the things that you'll find. And you can see that, I talked at the beginning, it applies to everywhere. And you can see, dysfunctional families, and you can see really harmonious family units, and you'll see there's and really strong family units. There'll be often it's the mother or a grandmother. You'll find a lot of the leaders in families will be a female role, even though typically we think of it as the old school, the breadwinner, the man of the house, and so on. But really, honestly, in the most successful families that I see, it's the woman that really brings the family together. And so, which having strong women in the workplace will also can also bring an element of that dynamic, especially when it comes to the interpersonal kind of skills. And then I'll have women that'll go to me, oh no, there's a lot, I've worked in offices that were all women, and there was, so it's not a one size fits all. It's about the dynamic. And that's why having, when I talk to women who are like, there's all women in the office and I can't stand it. Again, it's that there's not enough diversity there, right? It's too one-sided again. And so that comes back to our other point.
Yeah. And that context also that, a lot of very experienced leaders, I mean, they will lead teams, they'll have new teams on a quite frequent basis. I mean, they get a new assignments, they get a new team to lead. But there never seems to be that you can take the same approach with each team, because it's different contexts, it's different individuals. So you always have to be very open and agile and what should you call it? I don't know, but to take a customized approach to what the needs are for these particular individuals or for the task at hand per se. And of course, culture comes into play. I mean, if we're talking about organizational culture or natural culture, that's very different. But you can't just assume that whatever I've tried in the past will work now again, because it doesn't seem like it works that way. But of course, most leaders sort of figure that out very, very quickly and realize, okay, I need to try out something new here. And that's why they are assigned to these tasks, because they know how to do it.
Yeah. And I wasn't when I was pointing towards, think of the time in your life when you really came together. It wasn't like use that as a template, but get a sense in the feeling and what you did differently. Because I think in certain situations, you'll have people that are accustomed to having a leadership role, but they don't have the expertise or the knowledge or the respect of the group, and it's about assuming the role that's beneficial for the group, right? So in a business setting, a lot of the roles are already kind of set, and who the leader is predetermined, whereas in other groups it can happen more organically, and a leader will emerge. So I think for each situation it's understanding how can I most add value, and so therefore what role should I be taking on. And you can even do this if you've got a team and you're the manager, you're the leader of that team, but you're involved in an activity, and you can delegate some of that authority, right? That's sometimes the hardest thing for people to do, and then in that situation, being willing to take a step back and allow someone else in your team to take a leadership role, because that's their area of expertise, and they really bring a lot of know-how, and they can guide the group best in that situation. So knowing when to kind of delegate that authority is also an important part of team dynamics.
Yeah, and we're tapping into the motivational factor of autonomy as well, to create a space for people to perform individually, but also taking that responsibility. Okay, I can own this, but when I'm doing that, I need to communicate and work and cooperate with other people to make it work as well. So yeah, delegation becomes a really powerful aspect of not only creating a successful team, but really sustaining a successful team, I think. Because then we're talking about the more high performing teams already, right? Where
Yeah.
people are feeling that sense of accountability and yeah, able to perform on an individual basis.
So how would you recommend, like, how would you tell people to evaluate where their team development is at, or how successful their team is? Do you have certain metrics that you use, or uh, analysis? And I'll tell you, because you were just talking about high performing, and I think back,
Mm,
I'm a big basketball fan. I play basketball, and I've heard these professional athletes talk about successful teams that have won championships, and they'll be like, we some of us hated each other, but we overcame that to have this common goal. So
mm,
so it's interesting, because you think that there's a lot of the kind of, like in sports, the teams that win, or there's lots of camaraderie or so on, and that's not always the case. So it's more
mm.
overcoming the individual differences and so on. So I guess, what do you think? How would you kind of um, judge that, where how strong your team is in terms of its level of development, and where the areas of weakness are, and how to move those further? Do you have a
Mm.
system to sort of do an evaluation there?
Not the scientific one, but also I don't believe that it's very important. I mean, because if you look at, you're talking about HR systems or leadership effectiveness or team effectiveness. Uh, it's you're never going to have anything that's perfect. So benchmarking for me isn't really important. It's more, in that case, it's more benchmarking where you are now. So, how are we performing right now? And creating an awareness of that. And then, okay, what do we need to do to become better? And you're never going to be perfect as a team. A team can always be better. A leader can always be better. A system in an organization can always be better. So it's this constant cycle of improving, the improvement cycle, to just, how to, and to create a process around that. I think that's much more important to say, okay, what are we doing now? Where are we making progress? What do we need to develop now to serve what is our common goal right now? So for me, I think the most important for a team is to create um, um, a habit around doing that on a periodical basis. So it's not like, once a year we're going to go to a hotel and we're going to do some hiking and then cook and drink beer together. That's great fun, but that's not going to create an effective team. I think for me personally, I think it's much more effective to, I don't know what a good time worker, but a lot of teams that I've been working on a quarterly basis, you got and you have of course, if you can do it off-site, that's great. Sometimes you don't have that opportunity, but investing time and investing some space to look at, how are we doing right now, and creating a habit around that, and making sure that you're always developing. And you might have to do different times at each, or different topics or different aspects of it at each quarter, but this need to always want to improve and to create a habit around that, I think that's the most important thing. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, one of the metaphors that I always talk about is that one of my mentors always referred to as well. If you're looking at a football game, soccer, depending on where you are, but if you play 45 minutes and you go in there, you have a plan, then you have a halftime break. During the halftime break, what do? You look at what's working, what's not working, what kind of things do we have to change. Yeah, you have this kind of discussion, and then you go out and play another 45 minutes. And it's this halftime break to create a space for that on a periodical basis to make room for adjustments and improvements and reshufflements or whatever it is, just to be able to keep up and create the sense that yeah, we are developing, we are becoming better and better.
So you're saying it's a lot about keeping your eye on the prize, knowing where you're working towards, and making sure you've got all the components that'll get you there. Or is that, have I understood you correctly there? Like a continual development, but with the sort of vision of where you're the direction you're trying to get to.
Yeah, I think that's all. I mean, yeah, okay. Purpose and the common objective, that is the main part. So having a clear understanding of where we need to go, that needs to be in the focus always, I think. But then, yeah, if it's, for instance, then every quarter, what are we focusing now that will serve us to get there in a better way? And if it's a very new team, it might be certain things. If it's a team that has been together for 5 years already, you might be able to talk about more processes and operational issues of that aspect, but also maybe more softer parts of the team development. You never really know, because things always change.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's important, and I see it in sports, but I also see it in the workplace, is recognizing what's interfering with the team development. And it may be a personality, right? It may be someone in the group that because we've talked about values before, and I think in order to have a clear identity and to build a cohesive group, you have to have enough overlapping values, right? And that aligns with the purpose as well. And if you've got someone whose values are really not aligned with everyone else's in the group, and it can also be their attitude, their approach to things, and if they're disruptive can be good to a degree, but when it's disruptive in a destructive way, I think it's important to recognize is there an element in our team that is, and it doesn't have to be a person. It can be the office environment, like it could be a location, it could be a number of different things, but sometimes it does come down to one person, and you remove them and all of a sudden everything is more harmonious, right? So I think looking at the individual components of a team is important, in addition to the kind of processes and the other stuff you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're getting back to that sense of identity. What is our common identity? And values play a really important part of that as well.
Yeah. So look, I think I'm gonna have to wrap up because I've got another appointment coming up. But where would you like to? What are the final thoughts you'd like to leave people with on team development? I know this is, although I've worked on it, I know this is very much your specialty. So it'd be great to
Well,
for
it's
you to
something
leave.
that I really enjoy. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess where my mind is right now is really that the sense of the perfect team. For me, it doesn't exist, right? So there's always things that you can do to make it better. But I think, I guess the most important thing is to have that in mind of, on a time-to-time basis, you need to look at your team, and look at, how things are going. Are we doing things just per automatique or whatever you want to call it? Or are there certain things that we need to work on, and how do we do that in a good way? And how to do it, that's a totally different ballgame. But just creating that sense of awareness of, where are we as a team right now, and what do we need to develop further to making sure that we can reach our common objective in a more effective way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good message. And I think from my side, I think any kind of issues that you're having with a team, you start by looking at, is there a fundamental level of trust? It's the trust, the willing to have the open debates and the holding each other accountable, and making sure there's just strong communication. I think those are all really important, whether you're in a workplace or in a family environment, a group, any kind of group dynamic. I think these are valuable skills, because we thrive through our process of cooperation with each other, and it brings a huge level of satisfaction. So,
Yeah.
so
And sorry, the last thing is to think about, okay, for me as an individual, what can I do about it? It's very easy to, my boss sucks, or it's some stupid colleague's fault or whatever. Okay, so what's my responsibility? What can I do about it? I think that's the starting point.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think holding yourself accountable is important too, because in a group dynamic, it's always easy to blame others. And then when you're trying to build a team and you have within the group an us-them dynamic, that's really destructive. So equally, if you have an us-them dynamic within an organization where our team versus their team and people blaming each other, that can bring people together, but not in a very productive way. So just wanted to throw that in there at the end. So I'm not tribalism is something that's kind of evolutionarily part of our makeup, but not a very, we see in the world how destructive it can be. So yeah, that's great. Look, great conversation as always today, Toby. Thanks for joining on your vacation. We're committed to trying to do this in a biweekly cycle to share our ideas and hope that people are engaged. And our purpose is to help people become the best version of themselves, and organizations to do the same. So, Toby, thanks for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your vacation.
Cheers.
I think. Fantastic. I think I'll just add just a reminder that if you have any suggestions on topics we should cover, if you have any comments, criticisms, feedback of any kind, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach Toby through his LinkedIn site under Tobias Demker, and you can reach me at my website, peterteuscher.com. Feel free to drop us a note. We will be happy to engage with you and bring your comments into our discussion. So again, thanks everyone for joining us for another podcast, and we will talk to you next time. See you, Toby.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.